My name is Dana Atwood, and I am 58 years old. At my son's wedding reception, the one I paid $47,000 for, my new daughter-in-law raised her glass, looked me dead in the eye, and told 200 guests, "The best wedding gift would be you leaving this family for good." The guests gasped. The string quartet lost its place. My son studied his shoes. I set down my champagne, walked out to the terrace, and made one phone call. What happened in the next 15 minutes, and in the 10 days after, is why that bride wishes she had chosen her words more carefully. But first, you should know what my silence had been paying for 9 long years. Because my family never asked where the money came from. They only ever asked when the next check was coming. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women tell you how they finally stopped being quiet. We share stories about family, money, and the exact moment enough becomes enough. If you have ever been the mother who pays for everything and still gets erased from the photograph, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you are going to want to hear how this wedding ended. 9 years ago, my husband Peter collapsed on a bridge inspection site outside Columbus. A stroke. He was 52. I was 49, and our son Cole was 23, 3 weeks out of college with a marketing degree and a car payment. People ask how I got through that first year. The honest answer is paperwork. Grief has paperwork, and I was good at paperwork. I had spent 20 years building an accounting firm out of our kitchen, 9 employees by then, half the small businesses in town on my client list. So when the hospital sent its bills, I filed them. When the insurance company stalled, I called them every morning at 9 until they stopped stalling. When the funeral home quoted me a casket package with a straight face, I asked for the itemized version, and the price dropped $1,100 on the spot. Numbers held still for me when nothing else would. Peter used to tease me about it. He said I loved a balanced ledger the way other women loved fresh flowers. He wasn't wrong. But here is what I didn't see back then, standing in that quiet house with a stack of folders where a marriage used to be. When the person you talk to is gone, you start talking in the only language you have left. Mine was money. Cole would call, and I would hear his father's laugh buried in his voice, and whatever he needed, the answer was already yes, before he finished the sentence. The first check I wrote for my son was 3 days after his father's funeral, $1,800 for his rent. It was not the last. It was not even close to the last. And that is the part I have to own. Here is something you should know about Cole. My son is easy to love. Waiters remember him. Old ladies at church saved him cookies. He can walk into a room of strangers and leave with 3 golf invitations, and he means every handshake. That part is Peter, through and through. But Cole never once asked me for money. He mentioned, "There is a difference," and it took me years to hear it. He would call on a Sunday, and we would talk about the Browns game, and somewhere around minute 20 he'd say, "The transmission guy quoted me $1,200? Can you believe that?" And he would sigh and change the subject, and by Tuesday, the money would be sitting in his account because I had sent it. He never had to lower himself to asking. I never got the dignity of being asked. The transfer just happened, quiet as a thermostat, and we both pretended the house warmed itself. At the office, I was famous for one speech. I'd sit a client down, some sweet overextended couple, and say, "If you can't write it in the ledger where you can see it, it's not generosity, it's a leak." Every February I gave that speech a dozen times. Then I would drive home and wire my son $400 for a golf weekend he'd mentioned. I balanced books for half the town, and there was one column I never once totaled, because I knew what the number would do to me. The mentions got bigger, that's all. Slowly, politely, the way water rises. And then, one Thursday in October, 6 years ago, my phone rang, and it was a debt counselor from Cole's bank, and my son's voice in the background, and nobody was mentioning anymore. $41,500. That was the whole. Once I got all the statements on one table, 5 credit cards and the balance on a truck he should never have financed. Cole was 26, sitting in my kitchen with his ears red, and I remember thinking he looked exactly like he did at 9, when he'd batted a baseball through the Hendersons' window. I paid it, all of it, the following Monday. But I did one thing that surprised him, and I did it because of a sentence Peter used to say when clients wanted handshake deals. Paper keeps love clean. I drew up a promissory note, a demand note, the kind any lender can call due whenever she chooses. Principal, $41,500. Interest pegged to the federal rate, which is what the IRS expects if you don't want a loan reclassified as a gift. Payable on demand to Dana Atwood. I am a CPA. If I am going to love somebody with money, the file is going to be immaculate. Cole signed it at this same kitchen table without reading past the second line. He grinned and said, "Sure, Mom, invoice me." And we ordered a pizza. And that was that. Every December after, I forgave that year's interest with a one-line letter, the way the gift rules allow, and I filed each letter in a folder he never knew existed. He never made a payment on the principal. I never asked for one. For 6 years, both of those facts felt like love. It would take a wedding to teach me what they actually were, and to teach my son that a demand note is named for exactly what it sounds like. The house came a year later. Cole was 27 by then, and the debt mess had wrecked his credit. No bank in Ohio was writing him a mortgage, and his rent downtown was eating him alive. That spring, an estate sale put a brick colonial on Maple Street on the market. 3 bedrooms. A maple in the yard the size of a courthouse. 15 minutes from my townhouse. $315,000. I had it. That is not bragging. It is arithmetic. 28 years of 12-hour days, a paid-off building, and a life insurance payout I had never spent. I had it, and I bought the house outright, with my own name on the deed. And I want to be clear about this part, because it matters later. Keeping the title was not an accident, and it was not stinginess. I had just watched my son dig a $41,000 hole with a shovel called optimism. So I sat him down and said it plainly. This is my house. You live in it. You pay me rent. And someday, when the ground under you is solid, we will talk about the deed like adults. $850 a month. Market rate on that street was $2,200, and we both knew it. Cole hugged me, called it mom rent, and moved in that fall, 5 years ago. My friends at church thought I was a saint. My sister Gail thought I was a fool. They were both wrong. But I'll get to that. Because what nobody knew, not Cole, not Gail, not anyone, was what I did with that $850, the first Monday of every single month. Every rent payment Cole ever made went into an account he has never heard of. I opened it the week he moved in, at the same branch where I'd banked since Reagan. Every month his $850 landed in my checking, and every month I moved it straight across, untouched, into that quiet little account with his name written on the file tab in my desk. He thought he was paying me. He was paying himself. He just didn't know it yet. I used to sit with my coffee on the first Monday of the month and watch the balance tick up, and let myself imagine the day I'd hand it over. A wedding, maybe. A grandchild. Some ordinary Tuesday when he finally asked me how I was doing before he asked me for anything. 60 months. $850 at a time. $51,000, sitting there like a present wrapped so far in advance you forget which closet you hid it in. Gail says I was building him a safety net. That's generous. The truth has harder edges. I think I was building proof, a number I could point to someday that said, "See, she loved you the whole time. It was all right here in writing." As if love were a thing you could escrow. As if my son would someday audit me and I wanted to pass. I know how that sounds. I knew it then, too, and I kept depositing anyway, because it was the only sentence in our language I still knew how to say. Then one Sunday in April, 3 years ago, Cole called me, and his voice had a shine on it I hadn't heard since before his father died. "Mom," he said, "I met someone." Her name was Madison Whitmore, and the first time she walked into my house, she complimented the crown molding before she complimented me. She was 26 then, an event coordinator, Pretty the way a catalog is pretty. Everything ironed, everything placed. She brought a bottle of wine with a ribbon on it and said my home was so charming, so lived in, and I set the table and told myself that nerves make young women sound like realtors. I wanted to like her. I want that on the record. I asked about her family, and she gave me the Whitmores in one polished paragraph. Her father in furniture, her mother Sandra on every charity committee in the county. A paragraph so smooth it had clearly been vacuumed, but her eyes worked the whole dinner. They moved along my bookshelves, my china cabinet, the photographs on the mantel, not the way a guest looks, the way an appraiser looks. She priced the room. I watched her do it between the salad and the roast, and I remember the exact feeling, like hearing one wrong note in a hymn you've sung your whole life. Then she lifted her glass, tilted it toward my son, and said, smiling, "To self-made men." And Cole, my Cole, sitting in a house I owned, driving on tires I had mentioned into existence that February. Cole raised his glass and said not one correcting word. My son toasted the man he had invented, and drank. I laughed along, because that is what mothers do at nice dinners. But I drove my fork through that roast and thought, one of the three people at this table is a fiction, and I appear to be the only one who isn't voting for him. 2 springs ago, Cole proposed on a dock at sunset, and the Whitmores threw an engagement party with a champagne tower and a photographer who kept saying, "Candid, candid," while arranging everyone by height. I stood where I was placed. Sandra Whitmore worked that patio like a woman running for office, her voice pitched to Carrie. "We just adore Cole. He fits this family like he was made for it." Made for it. I filed the phrasing away with the rest of my collection. Gail, my little sister, appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses and her retired school teacher whisper that carries 30 feet. "You know their furniture stores went under, right? Marie from my bridge club says the bank took the lakeside house in 2009 and Sandra told everybody they were simplifying." I told her to hush, but I had heard the same story twice already, and pieces of it clicked against things I'd noticed. The leased Audi, the country club they belonged to but never ate at. A family keeping up a front is its own kind of tired, and I know what tired looks like. What unsettled me that night wasn't the Whitmores, though. It was my son's pronouns. All evening, we think fall weddings are overdone. We're leaning toward a vineyard. We feel strongly about a live quartet. Every we had Madison inside it, and none of them had me. A mother notices the day she is moved from the inside of a sentence to the outside. I smiled through it. I have a good reception smile. You'll see it again at an actual reception. The wedding, everyone agreed, would be beautiful. Nobody asked, out loud, who would be paying for it. That question, like every expensive question in my family, had already been quietly assigned. The wedding bills never came to me directly. They arrived sideways, the family specialty. Cole would call on a Sunday. We'd do the Browns, and then, "So, Stonebrook Vineyard needs the deposit by Friday. 12,000. Venues are insane, right?" A sigh. A pause shaped exactly like my checkbook. I want to tell you I hesitated, but we'd been running this play for 9 years, and muscle memory is a powerful thing. I wired the 12,000 on Wednesday. Then came the caterer, the florist, the quartet Madison felt strongly about, the photographer with the drone, the cake lady who charged by the sugar flour. By the week of the wedding, the total out of my accounts was $47,000, and I could show you the ledger, because of course I kept one. Every invoice tabbed, every confirmation stapled, force of habit and, if I'm honest, force of something sadder. Here is the part that stung. I was paying for a party I was learning about secondhand. There was a wedding group chat. I was not in it. Decisions arrived to me as announcements. The colors are sage and cream, the ceremony's at 5, the menu's plated, not buffet. And a year into the engagement, months before the wedding, Sandra Whitmore hosted a brunch where she clinked a spoon on a mimosa glass and told 40 people how thrilled she was to be hosting this wedding for our 2 families. Hosting. I had wired her florist that morning. I sat there with my eggs going cold and did what I always did. The math. silently, alone. Then the invitations came back from the printer. Heavy cream cardstock. Lovely. I found my name on the guest list, just not anywhere above it where the hosts' names go. 3 weeks out, Gail texted me a link with 5 exclamation points. The wedding website. There was a page called Our Story, written in Madison's voice, and I read it standing at my kitchen counter with my reading glasses on, and then I read it again, sitting down. It told the story of a self-made man, Cole Atwood, who hustled his way through his 20s, who was debt-free and driven, who bought his first home before 30. A photo of the Maple Street house sat right under that line, my maple tree glowing gold in the corner of the frame. My house. On the internet. As evidence of a man I had personally invented $41,500 ago. I did not simmer quietly, whatever you may be assuming about women my age. I called my son that night and told him the website needed to come down or come clean, and that a marriage built on a resume was a building code violation. And I said the harder thing. Madison needs to know, Cole. About the house. About the loan. Before the wedding, not after. You do not let that girl sign up for a man who doesn't exist. There was a long quiet on the line, and then my son said, in the gentle voice he uses on difficult clients, "She knows, Mom. She knows everything. She just doesn't like talking about money. Her family's weird about it. Trust me. Please don't make this a thing." I have replayed that sentence more times than I can say. If you've ever sat on a truth to keep a family photo smiling, tell me in the comments how long you held yours. I held mine 3 more weeks, on my own son's word. And be sure you're subscribed, because you are about to watch exactly what that cost. 2 weeks before the wedding, the Whitmores had us to dinner, and I finally saw the inside of the house Sandra called the cottage. It was beautiful the way a showroom is beautiful right before the liquidation sale. Good bones, staged rooms, and if you looked twice, the pale rectangles on the wallpaper where paintings used to hang. Nobody mentions rectangles like that. I went looking for the powder room and took a wrong turn into the back hall, and that is where I heard them, Sandra and Madison, in the kitchen with the water running. Sandra's voice had lost the committee luncheon sheen. It was low and hard, a voice with beams showing. You keep your face on Saturday, and you keep it on after. We don't owe anyone anything anymore. Remember that. And Madison answered, and I would not have known her. Small, young, a girl reciting something she'd been drilled on. I know, Mom. I remember. I stood in that hallway with my hand on the wainscoting, and I did the thing I do. I put numbers where the fog was. The store's gone in 2009. The house on Lakeside taken. Tuition. Gone with it. She'd finished at the state school on loans nobody spoke of. That family hadn't lost money. They'd been publicly amputated, and Sandra had spent 15 years teaching her daughter that owing anyone anything is how you bleed to death. Every debt is a leash. Every giver eventually pulls. I felt sorry for Madison Whitmore for exactly one hallway. It complicated nothing and explained everything. Then I came back into the dining room and she looked up at me, swift and automatic, and priced my coat. Understanding a snake's childhood, it turns out, does not thin the venom. It just tells you where she'll bite. The demotions were small, and they came like a drip line. First, the toast. I'd asked for 3 minutes at the reception. Mother of the groom. A few words. The kind of thing that happens at every wedding since weddings began. Madison called me herself. All warmth. The timeline's just so tight, Dana. The planner says toasts are where receptions go to die. You understand. The maid of honor kept her toast. Sandra kept hers. Mine died in committee. Then the seating chart leaked through Gail, who plays bridge with the planner's aunt. A head table for the wedding party, a family table for the Whitmores, and me at table 9. I looked it up on the floor plan I had, after all, paid for. Table 9 sat by the kitchen doors. Then came the program proof, and under "Hosted by," it said the Whitmore family in italics, and my name appeared nowhere on a piece of cardstock my own florist invoice was subsidizing. I want to be precise about what I did, because it matters for what came later. I did not sulk, and I did not explode. I called Cole and asked one plain question. Is this what you want or what you're avoiding? He gave me the client voice again. It's just details, Mom. It's her day. You're bigger than a seating chart. And I paid the florist's final $6,400 that same afternoon, because in my office, the person who signs is the person who decides. Weddings, apparently, run on a different accounting, one where the signature and the say-so are kept in separate rooms. I remember thinking the girl was working awfully hard to make one grandmother-aged woman invisible. What I couldn't figure out yet was why my visibility frightened her so much. 10 days before the wedding, Cole came by alone, which almost never happened anymore. He sat at my kitchen table, the one with his signature in a folder upstairs, and he circled the runway for 20 minutes. The Browns draft picks, my tomatoes. Whether I'd ever thought about a cruise? I poured coffee and waited him out. I've sat across from nervous clients for 30 years, and the ones circling longest are always carrying the biggest ask. Finally, he landed it. So, Madison and I were talking, and the house. We were thinking, with the wedding, it'd mean a lot if you signed it over, to both of us, as the wedding gift. He said it fast, like a man pulling tape off skin, and then he added the sentence that told me whose sentence it was. It's basically ours anyway, Mom. I set my cup down. Basically, I said. I let the word sit between us the way I'd let a client's bad number sit on a desk. Not cruel, just visible. Here is what I heard, and I want you to hear it too. Not greed, exactly. A script. My son does not say basically ours about a house he pays a fifth of market rent on. A man says that when someone has been saying it to him in the dark, patiently, for months. I told him the truth. That's a big piece of paper, sweetheart. Big pieces of paper get done right. After the honeymoon, with Tom, with the taxes squared. Not in a rush between the caterer and the cake. He nodded, too fast, relieved and disappointed at once, and drove back to the house I owned. And I sat with my cold coffee and made a different appointment entirely. Tom Rader has been my lawyer for 20 years and was Peter's poker friend for 15 before that. He has a corner office, terrible coffee, and the bedside manner of a man who has seen every kind of family there is. I laid it all out on his desk like a tax season, the demand note, 41-5, untouched. The deed to Maple Street, my name alone. The will, which at that time left everything, firm, house, accounts, to Cole. And then I told him what I actually wanted, and his eyebrows went up, and then they came down, and he smiled the way he does maybe twice a year. Because here was my plan. A cashier's check for $51,000. Every rent payment Cole had ever made me, all 60 of them, coming home to him at last. The note, stamped and folded, with a letter declaring it forgiven in full, my wedding present to them both. And a signed letter of intent. After the honeymoon, we would transfer the deed properly. Appraisal, gift filings, everything clean, the way Peter would have wanted it. All of it in one plain white envelope, tucked in my clutch, to be handed over at the reception, after the toasts I wasn't giving. Let Sandra have the microphone. I'd have the envelope. Tom squared the papers and asked the question he's paid to ask. And if the girl is what you think she might be? I remember looking out his window at the parking lot for a long moment. Then I'd rather find out while the deed still has my name on it, I said. But Tom, I want to be wrong. I carried that envelope for 10 days. I never once imagined the version of the evening where it stayed in my purse. God, as it turns out, has a sense of humor about wedding gifts. My answer, after the honeymoon, done properly, took about a day to travel from Cole to Madison, and the temperature dropped like an Ohio October. Nothing you could photograph. Everything you could feel. The dress fitting I'd been invited to months earlier quietly became, just us girls, you understand. My texts got answered in one line, hours later, with punctuation like a closed door. Thanks. Noted. We'll see. At the final fitting, Gail went, armed with peppermints and espionage. Sandra stood among the tulle and said, to no one in particular, in that voice pitched for exactly one set of ears. Some people hold on to things just to feel held onto. Sad, really. Using a deed as a leash. Gail reported it to me the way she used to report playground crimes. Vibrating. A leash. There was Sandra's whole cosmology, hiding in plain sight. Every gift a caller, every giver a handler. I understood the sermon Madison had been raised on a little better each week. Understanding, I want to say again, changed nothing about what was coming. And then Madison made her one move on me directly. She called, sweet as the cake lady's frosting, and said the planner was rebalancing the room, and that table 9 had the best view of the dance floor, honestly, and that she just knew I'd be more comfortable with a little breathing room than up front with the wedding party and the Whitmores. More comfortable. I have buried a husband, audited a school district, and raised a boy who once set the garage mildly on fire. I have never once in my life required breathing room from my own family. I thanked her for thinking of my comfort. Then I hung up and signed the caterer's final invoice, because the food, at least, would tell the truth. The rehearsal dinner was the Whitmore's contribution, $3,200 at a steakhouse, and I know the number because Sandra said it, twice, the way you'd mention a war wound. She stood up between courses with her glass high and gave a speech about what it means for our family to give these two their beginning, and the room made the warm sound rooms make, and the waiters brought the beef, and my son sat there, and let it all be true. That was the moment Gail nearly went over the table. I felt her inhale next to me. 30 years of second graders gives a woman a certain launch capability. And I put my hand on her wrist and pressed down. Not at his wedding, I said into her ear. Dana, she hissed, they are toasting themselves with your florist's money. I know, I said. I did the invoice. She stared at me. And that doesn't make you want to stand up and read it out loud? It did. Of course it did. Some nights it still does. But you cannot audit a fairy tale in the middle of the telling. Nobody thanks you, and the pages just get wet. So I ate my steak, and I complimented Sandra on the venue with a face I keep for the IRS, and under the tablecloth I touched the edge of my clutch, where the white envelope sat like a passport to a country I still believed we were all traveling to together. One more party, then the truth could come out at my speed. In Tom's office, with the taxes squared and nobody's mascara at risk. 2 more days. That was the plan. I want it noted somewhere that mine was the kind plan. 2 days later, at Stonebrook Vineyard, the bride opened a different set of books. I got to Stonebrook 2 hours early on the wedding day, because 30 years of Aprils have ruined me for arriving anywhere unprepared. The vineyard did look like $47,000. Rows of white chairs squared to the vines, sage and cream runners, the quartet tuning under a pergola, the cake, 6 tiers, 40 sugar peonies at $11 a flower, being leveled by a woman with a tiny spirit level, which I respected enormously. And here is the thing I noticed, walking that gorgeous grass in my mother of the groom shoes. Every vendor on the property came looking for me, not for the bride, not for Sandra, host of hosts. The florist's crew chief wanted me to approve a substitution. The caterer had a question about the vegetarian counts. The photographer confirmed the shot list with the client, me, per his contract, clause 2. One by one, the people doing the actual work of the day found the woman whose signature was on their actual checks, and one by one I sent them off happy. Then the venue manager appeared, a courteous young man with a clipboard and a lanyard, and confirmed tonight's schedule, and said, "And the balance due this evening, Mrs. Atwood, will run the same card as the deposit?" I said yes, without looking up from the seating diagram. Remember that clipboard. It has a part to play. Through the bridal suite window above us, I could see my son in his shirt sleeves, wrestling his bow tie, laughing at something with his groomsmen, and my chest did that thing it does. Pride and grief holding hands. Every beautiful thing in that vineyard had my name under it somewhere, on a stub, on a contract, on a deed. By sunset, thanks to one polite man with a clipboard, the whole room would know it. And so, at last, would the bride. The ceremony was, I'll say it plainly, perfect. 5 o'clock light through the vines, the quartet floating Pachelbel across the rows, Madison coming down the aisle looking like the cover of a magazine that costs more than other magazines. My son cried at the sight of her, and I cried at the sight of him, because under the fiction and the pronouns he was still the boy who'd carried his father's casket with his jaw set like concrete, and a mother's eyes have no off switch. Then came the vows. Cole thanked God. He thanked the officiant. He thanked Sandra and the whole Whitmore family for making this day possible. The words went out over the speakers my deposit had rented, across 200 guests on chairs my card had secured, and none of it landed anywhere near me. I sat in the second row, with Gail's hand closing over mine, and I watched the videographer's camera sweep the family faces and slide across me the way a camera slides across an empty chair. A few heads half-turned, the ones who knew. Marie from Bridge, my office manager and her husband. People whose eyes said quietly, "We see you," even if the microphone doesn't. I sat straight and kept my reception smile bolted on, and I ran my thumb along the clutch in my lap, along the stiff edge of the white envelope inside. It steadied me, that edge. Let them have the speeches, I thought. Speeches evaporate. What I had in my lap was $51,000 of patience, a forgiven debt, and a house. The truth, wrapped in paper, waiting for the right quiet moment. I had one gift left to give and one thing left to lose. By 10 o'clock that night, I would be holding neither. The reception tent glowed like the inside of a pearl, and my seat was at table 9, hard against the kitchen doors. Every time a tray of duck went by, the doors swung and breathed warm gravy air across my shoulder, and the busboys learned to bank around my chair like I was a traffic cone. The place card said, Donna Atwood. Donna. $47,000, and they'd bought a vowel of somebody else's name. I took out my pen and corrected it. One small clean line, the A where the O had been, and set it back on its little easel, because if the evening was going to misfile me, it could at least misfile me accurately. Gail, exiled beside me on the strength of being my sister, read the card and said words I will not repeat near a church. I told her the same thing I'd told her all month. Eat the duck, Gail. We are being gracious tonight. And honestly, I could hold it all at arm's length. The table, the card, the toasts I didn't give, because of what was sitting in my lap. The white envelope. My plan had shrunk to something small and bright as a pilot light. When the toasts were done and the cake was cut, I would find a quiet minute, take my son and his bride aside, and put $51,000 and a forgiven debt and a promised deed into their hands. Let the seating chart say what it wanted. The last word of the night was going to be generous, and it was going to be mine. The toasts ended. The band shifted gears, and across the tent I saw the venue manager, lanyard swinging, clipboard up, threading his way through 200 guests, straight toward table 9. He was a nice young man. I want that said, because none of it was his fault. He had a job, the job had a checklist, and the checklist said the balance was due tonight. He arrived at my chair in a gap between songs, one of those pockets of quiet that open in a loud room like ice cracking, and he leaned in, courteous, and set it at exactly clipboard volume. Mrs. Atwood, the remaining balance on the venue and catering, we're running the same card as the deposit, correct? I just need one more signature from you. One more signature. From me. In the little silence, the words carried 2 tables in every direction, the way water finds every crack. I saw Forks pause. I saw Marie from Bridge close her eyes like a woman hearing a hymn confirmed. And 8 feet away, at the edge of the dance floor, I saw Sandra Whitmore, host of hosts, toastmaster of the Whitmore beginning, go absolutely still, her smile frozen at committee luncheon setting while her eyes did fast, terrible math. I signed. What else does a woman like me do? I signed my own name on my own card for my own son's wedding, folded my receipt into my clutch next to the envelope, and thanked the nice young man. When I looked up, Sandra was already moving, cutting through the crowd toward her daughter with the focus of a Secret Service agent, and I watched her whisper into the bride's ear, and I watched my new daughter-in-law's face change. Before you see what she did next, if a stranger with a clipboard ever detonated your family's secret at $100 a plate dinner, put it in the comments. I want to hear it. And subscribe, because the next 5 minutes are the reason you clicked. Madison set down her glass and started across the floor. She came the long way, collecting a bridesmaid's hand squeeze here, a cheek kiss there, so that her arrival at table 9 looked like a bride making rounds and not a woman closing distance. Up close, her face was flawless, and her eyes were the eyes from that first dinner, doing inventory, pricing the threat. She did not lower her voice. That is the detail I need you to have. She raised it, just enough, tuned to carry to the tables that had heard the clipboard. Dana, I'm so glad I caught you. I've been wanting to say something all night. A little laugh, glass half lifted, the picture of a toast. You have done so much, truly. Everyone knows how involved you like to be. Which is why I hope you'll understand what I'm about to say, because I mean it with love. She let the room lean in. She was an event coordinator to her bones. She waited for her acoustics. Cole and I have everything we need now, so the best wedding gift, the very best gift you could give us, honestly, would be you leaving this family for good. The gasp was real. You have heard rooms gasp in movies. In life, it is quieter and worse. 100 small inhales and the ice stopping in the glasses, the quartet's cellist lifting her bow off the strings mid-note. Somebody's fork rang against a plate like a tiny, horrified bell. Sandra did not gasp, I noticed. Sandra watched, chin high, a general reviewing the field. And the champagne flute in my hand was suddenly very cold and very thin, the stem like an icicle between my fingers, and the bubbles kept rising through it, stupidly festive, while 200 people waited to see whether the invisible woman at table 9 would cry, or scream, or shatter. I did none of those things. I turned my head and looked for exactly one person. Not Madison. Madison had told me precisely who she was, on schedule, in public. There was nothing left to learn at her end of the room. I looked past her, through the propped-open edge of the crowd, to my son. Cole stood by the sweetheart table in his beautiful tuxedo, a boy I had walked to kindergarten, and he heard what his wife said to his mother in front of 200 guests, and he looked down at his shoes. He turned his new wedding band around his finger, once, twice, and studied the parquet like a man inspecting it for structural flaws. 3 seconds, maybe 4. You can live a very long time inside 4 seconds. I aged 9 years in them. Because there it was, the answer to the question I had been paying all this time not to ask. If the check stopped, if the wiring and the deposits and the quiet fixing all stopped, would anybody stay? I had bought a decade of not knowing, $850 a month, $47,000 a wedding, and his shoes were more compelling than my face. The strange thing is what I felt. Not the knife I expected. A kind of terrible bookkeeping calm, the one that comes at the end of an audit when the number is bad, but at least, finally, it's true. I looked at the sweetheart table with its imported peonies, at the tent my card had raised, at the bride glowing with the confidence of a woman who believed she had just evicted a guest, and the entry wrote itself, clean as a line in a ledger. I was never a guest at that table. I was the table. So I stood up. I placed my champagne, still full, next to the card that said Donna with my small correction on it, and I walked, unhurried, straight-backed, my mother's posture, toward the terrace doors, taking out my phone as I went. The terrace was strung with cafe lights, and the glass doors swung shut behind me and turned the party into an aquarium. All that shimmer, none of the sound, crickets in the vines, bass thumping faintly through the panes. My hands were not shaking. I want that on the record, too. Tom Rader answered on the third ring because men his age with law licenses and poker histories always answer, even at 9 on a Saturday. Dana, aren't you at the wedding? I am, I said. I'm on the terrace. Tom, I need you to take some instructions. A beat. Papers moving. 40 years of friendship compressing into professional quiet. Go ahead. Call the note Monday. Formal demand, full principal. Buy the book. And enclose the installment option. I'm not trying to drown him. I'm trying to wake him. Draft a codicil taking Cole and his wife out of the will. I'll come in Wednesday to sign. And start the paperwork moving the Maple Street house into my living trust. This week. The crickets sawed away. Through the glass, tiny and bright, the cake was being wheeled out to applause I couldn't hear. You sure? Tom said, not arguing, confirming, the way he'd confirm a wire amount. I've never been more balanced in my life, I said. Then I called the bank's private client line, the after-hours one they give you when your firm has banked there for 28 years, and I stopped the standing transfers, the insurance, the phone plan, the small automatic kindnesses. Effective Monday. 14 minutes, both calls together. I know because I checked, leaning on that cold stone rail, breathing vineyard air. Understand, nothing legal happens in 15 minutes. No deed moves, no will changes, no debt comes due between the salad and the cake. But a decision happens. A decision happens all at once, like a bone setting, and the paperwork just follows it like a shadow. I put my phone away and opened the glass doors. 15 minutes after my daughter-in-law asked for my disappearance as a wedding gift, I walked back into that tent, and I did not go to the microphone. I want you to notice that, because everyone tells this story wrong when they retell it. There was no announcement, no raised voice, no receipts read to the room, no scene. That is her instrument, and I do not play it. I crossed the floor while the caterers passed out cake, and I came to my son, who stood a little apart from his bride, pale around the mouth already, the way people get when they sense weather. I put my hand on his sleeve, softly, for one set of ears, a trick I'd learned that month from the professionals. I said, the note gets called Monday. You'll want to look at what you signed. The house goes into my trust this week. Tom will send everything in writing so nobody has to remember anything. He said, Mom, in a voice I hadn't heard since the Hendersons' window, and Madison started toward us, radar up, too far away to have caught any of it. I patted his sleeve, the same 2 pats I'd given him at his father's graveside. Enjoy the party, I said. It's paid for. And I walked out. Past the sweetheart table, past Sandra's frozen committee smile, past the gift table piled with silver envelopes, where my clutch, with the white one still inside it, never even slowed. At the tent's mouth, the venue manager hovered, wretched, clearly aware by now of what his clipboard had started. The band, he stammered, had offered to play an extra hour, but the overtime hadn't been authorized. And I took his pen. I signed it. $300, the last signature I ever put on that wedding, and I signed it because the 200 people in that tent had done nothing wrong, and because my name, whatever the program said, was still the one that meant something at Stonebrook. Then I went home. The drive from Stonebrook to my townhouse is 40 minutes of dark 2-lane and vineyard fence, and I made it with the radio off, both hands on the wheel, at exactly the speed limit, the way you drive when some deep system of you has switched to auxiliary power. The quiet in that car was enormous. 9 years of noise, mentions, sighs, deposits, group chats I wasn't in, all of it switched off at once, and what was left underneath was so still it rang. Gail called before I was out of the parking lot. Her headlights stayed in my mirror half the way home anyway, my sister running escort like a tugboat. Where are you? What did you do? Dana, what did you do? I'll tell you tomorrow, I said. Nobody's hurt. Everybody's fine. Which was true, and also the biggest lie I'd told all year, depending on the ledger you used. In my kitchen, I set the clutch on the counter, and the white envelope slid halfway out of it and sat there under the stove light, fat with its cashier's check and its stamped note and its letter of intent, addressed to nobody now. $51,000 of patience with no forwarding address. I looked at it for a while. There were no tears and there was no gloating. I stood in a quiet house I owned and felt the floor hold, which is a sensation I recommend. My phone lit up on the counter, buzzed, went dark, lit again. Coal, coal, coal. I turned it face down, washed my one water glass, and went to bed like a woman who has just closed out a brutal fiscal year, which, in every way that counts, I had. Monday came. Tom's letters went out. By Wednesday, my son knew exactly what his life cost, and so did his wife. Here is what actually went out on Monday, because I believe in showing the work. 1. A formal demand letter on the promissory note, principal of $41,500, due in 30 days, exactly as the document he signed allows. Stapled behind it, because I am his mother and not his repo man, a ready-made installment plan. $200 a month to start. Renegotiable. Zero drama. Sign here. 2. A notice to my tenants at Maple Street. Not an eviction. Read it twice, Madison. It isn't one. 3 choices in writing. Stay and pay market rent. $2,200 like every other adult on that street. Buy the house from me at independent appraisal with a real mortgage, like grown-ups. Or take 90 days to relocate. 3 times what Ohio law requires me to offer, because I was raised right. 3. Tom's cover letter, noting the codicil. I signed it Wednesday at 10. 2 witnesses, decaf after. And noting that the deed to Maple Street was on its way into the Dana Atwood Living Trust, where it would sit, safe from basically, for as long as I pleased. 4. Small but real. The phone plan and the car insurance came apart that week, too. The bank had already stopped the standing transfers. Every single item had an option attached, a door left open, a kindness stapled to a consequence. I wasn't burning my son's life down. I was handing him, for the first time in his life, the receipts for it. The voicemail started Tuesday and ran the classic cycle. Anger by noon, bargaining by dinner, a long silence, then the low, flat voice menus when they're reading from their wife's script. I listened to everyone with my coffee, the way you review a client file. It was the 4th voicemail that mattered, though. Because behind Cole's voice, somewhere back in my house's good acoustics, I could hear a second voice, rising. Wednesday night he called and I answered, and he had me on speaker, carelessly, I think, his hands full of paper, so I heard the whole scene the way you hear a play from the wings. My son's voice close and strained. "You're really doing this, Mom? You're really—" And then, behind him, the sound of Tom's envelopes being handled, pages turning fast, and Madison. Madison reading. Madison arriving, document by document, at the actual arithmetic of her marriage. What is— Cole, what is this? Why is the deed— This says the house is hers. Why does the deed say the house is hers? Paper. Paper. There's a note. You signed a— 41,000. You told me the debts were a rumor your mother started. And then the sentence that told me everything about what my son had built his courtship on, delivered at a pitch the speaker couldn't soften. You let me marry a man who owns nothing? I stood at my counter listening to a myth die in my rental property. Whatever she had priced that first night at my dinner table, the molding, the china, the sun, every appraisal was collapsing at once, and under her fury I could hear it plain as a hairline crack. The old Whitmore terror, the amputation, the leash. She had married, she believed, her way out of ever owing anyone. She had married the most owing man in the county. "Mom," Cole said, wrung out, "say something." So I said the one thing I had. "She asked for the truth as a wedding gift, sweetheart. Tell her it's from me." I hung up gently. I slept well, and I am not ashamed to report it. And Thursday afternoon, a silver Lexus I recognized pulled into my drive, and the doorbell rang, and it was not my son come to talk terms. It was Sandra Whitmore. She came in the full uniform, pearls, blowout, the smile, and she stood on my porch and got to it with a velvet crowbar. "Dana, I think we can agree things got away from everyone Saturday. Emotions, champagne. But what you're doing now, lawyers, letters, to children? A pause, honed on 20 years of committees. Family doesn't invoice family. I looked at her pearls and thought about pale rectangles on wallpaper. Funny, I said. I've been the invoice for 9 years. You've been reading my line items since the engagement. You toasted with my florist's flowers. Her smile held. Her eyes went to gravel. She tried flattery, then history, then the real message. How it would look. Relatives were already talking, she said. A mother who blows up her only son's wedding over a seating chart. That is the sentence they will say at every Thanksgiving in this county, Dana. And you know how sentences stick. Oh, I knew. She left me with that, heels crisp down my walk. And I'll be honest with you, because this story is worthless if I'm not. It worked on me for about 6 hours. Gail came over with wine and fury and a strategy. You have the receipts? All of them. Post every invoice. Let the whole county read who hosted what. And for a moment, one long, ugly, bright moment, I wanted it. The vindication tour, the public audit. Then I set it down. No, I said. Then I'd just be her, with better math. The theater is their family business. Mine is books that balance in the dark. But that night the house was very quiet, and I got out the album Peter never knew I still updated. And there was Cole at 8, gap-toothed on the porch of our first little house, holding a fish like a trophy. I sat with my thumb over Tom's number for a long time. Pause it all. The thumb argued. Buy it back. Buy him back. You know the price. You've always paid it. I put the phone down unpressed. A few mornings later, a familiar engine idled in my driveway for a full minute before it shut off. Cole, alone. He sat where he always sat, at my kitchen table, third chair. The one whose leg he'd loosened at 15, tipping back to charm his father out of a grounding. He looked terrible. New husband terrible. Not 2 weeks in. Unslept. Over-coffeeed. A man learning what his signature weighs. I made him coffee anyway. Cream and too much sugar. The way he's taken it since high school. Because the day I stop knowing, that is the day they can bury me. He turned the mug without drinking. Circled the runway. The Browns. My tomatoes. Again, in October. And then he landed it. And I understood within the first breath that the speech had been drafted elsewhere and rehearsed on the drive. Mom, here's the thing. Madison knows things got out of hand at the reception. She's willing to move past it, all of it. So here's what we're thinking. You call Tom, put everything back the way it was. The note, the transfers, the house. Especially the house. And you apologize. Not to me, to her. At Thanksgiving, in front of the family. Just, you know. Say the stress got to you. Say you got carried away with the lawyer stuff. He turned the mug again, and his voice went soft in a way that broke something small and load-bearing in me, because he meant it kindly. He truly did. And then, you're back in, Mom. Holidays, Sunday dinners, and when we have kids. He let it hang there gently, a man laying his best card on his mother's kitchen table. You'll know your grandkids, Madison promises. She wants this to work. There it was. Everything I wanted. The chair at the table, the boy, the grandbabies whose college accounts I had already, God help me, sketched on a legal pad one soft-headed evening, offered back to me whole, priced in full. The currency. One public apology for a thing that was done to me. One signature undoing the only honest paperwork in 9 years, and my permanent return to the exact seat I had always paid for. Table 9, forever, with better lighting. I looked at my son's hopeful, exhausted face. Then I looked at the drawer by the stove, where a white envelope had been sleeping since the wedding night. Every number in my life had always balanced eventually, one way or another. My son was offering me the one deal that never would. I want to tell you exactly what I did, because this is the part I'd want another woman to have in her pocket for the day she needs it. I did not raise my voice. I refilled his coffee first, his mother, not his creditor, and I sat down across from him at that old table, and I told my son no. I'm not apologizing at Thanksgiving, Cole. A woman asked 200 people to witness my eviction from this family. I won't stand in front of those same people and call that my fault. Not for holidays, not even for grandchildren. He started to speak, and I put my hand flat on the table, the old chairman's gesture, and he stopped. But you came for terms, so here are terms, real ones. And I gave them, level as a rate sheet. The house. You and Madison can stay at market rent, like every other couple your age on that street. Or buy it from me at appraisal, a true mortgage, your names, your equity. And I will cry at that closing with my whole heart. The note, $200 a month. Start whenever you're ready. The plan's already in the envelope Tom sent. No interest games, no ambushes. It's the gentlest paper you'll ever sign. He was shaking his head slowly, not at the numbers, I think, but at the existence of a mother with numbers, and I made myself say the rest, the part I'd been chewing since the terrace. And you should hear this, because it's mine to own. I paid for everything, all these years, so I would never have to ask whether you'd stay if I didn't. That was my lie, sweetheart. I ran it 9 years, and it cost more than the house. I'm done with it. I reached across and put my hand over his, over the wedding band. I will always be your mother, but I am done being your bank. He sat back out of my reach, and my charming boy, his father's laugh, and his wife's script, stood up from my table and found the one sentence with a blade in it. Then you're going to be alone, Mom. You get that, right? She won't come back from this. Then you're going to be alone. I let it land. It was, after all, the exact bill I had been dodging for 9 years, arrived at last, itemized. Maybe, I said, but I'll be somebody's mother, not somebody's money. Whenever you can tell the difference, my door works fine. He left. The truck door, the engine, the gravel. Then just the kitchen clock. And a cooling mug with too much sugar in it. And me. I sat in my quiet, unpurchased house, holding his cup with both hands, and I let it be true. I had gotten myself back, whole, at retail. It had cost exactly 1 son. A winter is long enough to learn the shape of a new quiet. The world you should know did not applaud me. Madison's wedding photos went up online in a gorgeous album titled Best Day Ever. Not one frame with me in it, which by then read less like an insult and more like accurate bookkeeping. Sandra's version made its rounds, and 2 cousins stopped calling, and at church, Marie from Bridge squeezed my arm hard enough to leave a mark. Which is how women like us say we know the truth, honey. The Whitmores are still the Whitmores. No lightning found them. That machine was running before me and will run long after. I never expected to shut it down, only to stop feeding it my son's rent money. Speaking of which, they stayed. Market rent, $2,200, arrives by bank transfer on the 1st of the month. No note, no signature line filled in beyond the required. It is the coldest money I have ever received, and the cleanest. Thanksgiving happened at Gale's. 12 people, paper napkins, a turkey Gale overcooked into a form of jerky, and I laughed more than I had in 2 years, and missed my son so hard I had to stand in the bathroom for a minute with the fan on. Both things were true. That is the part nobody tells you about winning back your spine. It comes with a full set of ribs, and they all ache. Then, the second week of March, an envelope. Thin. My name and address in Cole's handwriting, which has not changed since 8th grade. No letter, no apology. Inside, a check for $200, and on the memo line, nothing but March. I sat down at the kitchen table and I held that little check for a long time. It was the first payment ever made on that note. 32 years old, and this was money nobody had wired, recycled, or pretended about. His own, toward his own debt, in the open, with his name signed under the truth of it. I drove to the bank and deposited it like any well-papered receivable, because that is what respect looks like in my language. And the white envelope, the check, the forgiven note, the letter about the deed, it's in my safe deposit box next to the deed itself. I didn't shred it. The gift is still there. So is the door. Both of them open for whoever knocks honestly. In April, a second check came. Memo line. April. Under it, small. Tell Aunt Gail the turkey story made Madison's mom flinch. It's a start. It's real. And it's a start. I turned 59 this summer, and here is the one thing I know now that I did not know at table 9. If the only chair a family saves for you is the one your money sits in, stand up, because you can owe a mother everything and never once be invoiced. And anyone who forgets that was never counting you as family, only counting what the family could count on you for. That's my story. A place card that said Donna. A champagne flute set down gently, still full. One phone call from a terrace, 14 minutes, no shouting. And a thin little check in the mail that just said, March. If you have ever paid for a table you weren't welcome at, if you have ever been the wallet in the family photo, tell me your story in the comments, because I read every single one, and there are more of us at table 9 than anybody admits.